What's up, y'all? Welcome to Music for the Average Joe. Let's talk about drums and bass today. Arguably the two most important aspects of most songs. I got some exercises to get you thinking in the right way and get creative with it. Now, I'm not really a drummer, and even bass isn't my most comfortable instrument, but as long as you understand the functions of these, then you don't really have to be the most technical player to get some really banging tracks. It is music for the average Joe, after all, not music for the professional studio musician. So let's dig in, and of course on Patreon I'm going to have a deeper dive for anyone that wants to check that out. Alright y'all, I'm going to start off with the drums so we can make a drum track to play the bass to, sort of as our metronome, which I think is always a good idea even if you don't want drums in the piece. Now we're going to be talking about programming drums today. I don't have a kit with me, but one thing I want to show you real quick, I like to play the drums in to get a more human feel so everything's not right on the grid. But here, especially if you're using Logic Pro, but I think most DAWs probably have this, I have a drum kit pulled up. So I'm going to click select pattern region here, right click, and here we have the option to actually click in exactly where we want the different parts of the drums to play. And this is really useful for many reasons. I mean, you can actually use it for a song. It's a little robotic because it's right on the beat. But also, if you just want to hear what something like syncopated or weird sounds like, you can plug that in. Or even you can create the drum track that you want to play and practice to it, or even record to it so that you have a very, it helps you kind of stay on the beat more. So I'm just going to plug in here, a pretty standard beat, and you can hear it, and then we'll get into actually playing the drum track itself. Alright, so that is just a quick way to program the drums, which can be really useful, and you can get creative with that. Now, I think some producers would probably say, why spend the time playing the drums in when you can just program them? To me, this process is kind of sacred, and of course, playing the drums, you get the little bit of inconsistencies that is only human. So we try and get as close to the beat as we can, but no matter what, you're always going to be a little bit off, and that's just the way it is, and that's a good thing. That creates the style and the feel of the song. So, first thing, get good at playing with a metronome. That's really important, and if you need to, again, create the drum track and play along to that. But you really want that click there to make sure that your music is actually in time. It might seem in time to you if you're not playing to a metronome, but unless you have a really steady internal clock, it's actually pretty difficult to keep it going really consistently the whole time. So I highly recommend playing to a metronome, practicing to a metronome, and then when you layer in other instruments, it's going to make it a lot easier. So I think a good place to start, and I used to have a drum pad, but it randomly vanished, as things do. So now I do this on my synth here. So we got kick, and we got snare. So a good place to start, simple as it gets, just kick on 1, snare on 2 and 4, kick on 3. So pretty basic, but again, this is where we want to start. And I'm not using a metronome right now, but when I actually lay the track in and record it, I'm going to put one on. So from there, let's explore our different kick options. So what if we were to do kick on the 1 and then the 8th note after that, so the 1 and. So it'd be like 1 and 2 and, 1 and 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2, 3 and 4. What if we were to play on the and of 2, a little syncopation there, so we got 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4. Now, all combinations of these are just going to help make your drums a little more interesting. You want to mess around, and I'm a big fan of, if you're even in a hip-hop track where you would just, repeat the drums and copy and paste or whatever, I'm a big fan of laying in at least maybe 8 bars or so. That way you're getting some variation in there, even though the track's just repeating. It's not just going to be doom, doom, ka, doom, doom, ka, the whole way through. So if you're in 4/4, you basically, to make your music sound conventional, which can be good and can be bad, I usually try and stay mostly within that framework of the kick on the 1 and 3, and then the snare on 2 and 4. And then from there, you can put either one of those on the ands, the in-between, the 8th notes, which is the offbeat, which is when it starts to sound really cool and syncopated. So let's just try a couple different examples of that. So I'm going to do kick on the 1, snare on the 2, kick on the and of 2, kick on the 3, then the snare on 4, snare on the and of 4. So it'll sound like this. And now let's just mix it up a little bit. We'll do the kick on the 1, we'll do the snare on the end of 1, snare on 2, and then we'll do the kick on 3, snare on the end of 3 and 4. So it'll sound like this. So again, pretty basic, but as we start to mix and match these things and then add in the hi-hats and cymbals and whatever other percussion we want, it starts to give a cool feel. So especially in like hip hop, I notice, and I'm still learning all this stuff too. You know, I'm always a student, but the more I listen, I'm hearing the kick is always really prominent, and it usually is like knocking all over the place. You know, it's not just on the 1 and 3, and sometimes it's on like the 16th notes. So it could be like, yeah, like something like that's not uncommon. 3 kicks and 16th notes right in a row. So you see, as you kind of start to mix and match that stuff, you get some more and more interesting flavors, and again, the hi-hat's going to make a big difference. Now on the Patreon, we're going to talk about even more getting into that syncopation, and I'm going to play a faster beat on there too, so you can hear what, like, you know, when we're playing at maybe 120 or somewhere around there, what that's going to sound like. So given that, I'm just going to record a track here with the metronome, and then I'll add a hi-hat, and from there we'll talk about the bass. So something like that, it's not perfect, but it will get the job done. And again, you can mess around with all the variations. And a note on quantizing, which is where you use the computer to fix the MIDI notes you just played. I wouldn't go too crazy with it, but it's up to you, and it depends also on how far off the rhythm you are. If you're pretty far off, you might want to try it and just see if it fixes it up a little bit. Again, if you quantize to 100, you're going to sound kind of robotic. It's going to be right on the grid, but maybe like 50-60%. I used to do that. Now I actually pretty much don't touch it very much, just because I like that sort of human feel. I like the little bit of air, whether it drags or, you know, rushes. But you can kind of play with that and see what feels good for you. So now I'm going to play in some hi-hats, and on the Patreon I'm going to talk about cymbals and, you know, like open hi-hat crash type of thing. But for now, the hi-hats, you know, there's of course a million different ways to approach it, like anything. And I think when you get the kick and snare, you know, with a lot of syncopation playing off the beats, it can be cool to just have the hi-hats, you know, just on the 8th note, just kind of the hi-hats actually kind of locking in the beat in some ways just as much as the kick and snare is, because it's like playing on the beat while the kick and snare is kind of doing its own thing, although still keeping the beat. Another option is the hi-hats can be used as just sort of like an ornament thing. You don't have to play them straight like that. You can sort of do those off the beat. You can have 2 hi-hat hits over the course of a bar, which maybe is a little unusual in like rock music, but as hip-hop tracks become more popular, it's like the hi-hat's always doing all kinds of stuff, and sometimes it's hard to hear in the mix too, or sometimes it's really prominent in the mix, but I'm just going to play something relatively straightforward and simple for this track. Alright, so I stayed on the beat for a lot of that, just played 8th notes, but also just laid out for a couple of it and didn't play any for certain parts, which I think is really the essence of music. You know, sometimes certain instruments are playing one thing while other instruments are playing the other, and you don't always want them to be completely in sync. It's the push and pull that, you know, gives the tension and release that makes it feel so good and makes us bow our heads. So let's run with that drum track, and now we'll go to bass. Okay, so I just recorded a real quick synth pad to give us some chords to work with, because bass is the foundation of the harmony. So the bass always plays not always, but the bass usually plays the root note of the chord, and then from there the other notes are built on top of that. Now we can get into inversions and the bass plays different things, but that'll come in a different lesson. So let's take a listen to this little synth track that I put in. And of course the bass can exist without chords, but it always plays notes that are related to a key and some chords. So let's listen to this track. A minor, to D minor, the 4 chord, back to A minor, then that is a G sharp diminished. So again, I just wanted to reiterate, you don't always have to play the root on the bass, but we'll get into some of that in a different lesson. We'll get a little more involved and into the weeds. for now, we're going to take it easy, and we're going to start with the roots, and we're going to start by just playing the roots, then we're going to try a different rhythm, and then we're going to try one more note in there besides the root, and then try some different rhythms with that. And then, of course, on Patreon, we'll dive into other notes that you can play in the bass line and how to really bring it home. So let's go for it. We're going to start by playing an A note, and we're just going to let that ring out for the whole bar. And then for the D minor, we'll go to D, let it ring the whole bar, back to A, and then, of course, that G sharp for the last note. So let's give it a try over this beat. 1, 2, whole notes, go. Just listen to it and see what we think. Kind of works because the drums are carrying the rhythm, right? But still, maybe a little boring. Alright, next up we are going to play a quarter note on the root. So we got A, then we're going to cut it, then on beat 3, we're going to play 2 eighth notes. So it'll sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And then we'll repeat that same rhythm with all the notes. So let's give that a try. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's listen to it now. A little more groovy than the last one, right? So, real quick note about anything that I teach is you want to listen to it. You want to go find real world examples and listen. So just listen to your favorite songs, pick out the bass, it's the lowest instrument. It's usually just hanging on the root notes and playing something simple but rhythmic. Or, I mean, in most types of music, it depends. Jazz, they'll be walking all over the place, which is awesome. Anyway, I digress. So, that last one was a little more rhythmic, but also still a little boring. So let's add in the fifth of each chord as opposed to just the root. So we're going to add the fifth on beat 3 and play the root on beat 1. So for example, for A minor, we're going to have A, 2, and we'll go to E, which is the fifth for 3. And then D, 2 to the A, which is the fifth. A again, it's our root note. E. And then we'll go to this G sharp, and for a diminished chord, since it's a flat fifth and gets a little weird, we're going to play this B note here, which will also lead us nicely back to the A. So let's give that a shot. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I feel like a broken record saying this, but naturally there's a lot of different things you can do on bass. It's a really fun instrument, but we're just scratching the surface of the most basic things, and then from there you can take that and build on it. And really, just playing stuff like this, it depends what you're going for, but for a lot of songs that'll work. I mean, just the root note is all they're looking for. If you get too busy, you actually might be in a little trouble unless you know where to play, because if someone's singing, you don't want to be going too crazy. You just want to be hanging on the roots. Anyway, let's try that. We're getting into a little more interesting here, but let's try that, but we'll do a short stab on each note. And we'll try the same thing we just did, except for instead of holding the notes out, we'll do short little stabs on each one. So let's give that a shot. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright folks, I hope that is helpful. Again, we're really just getting into the basics here. There's a lot you can do. Rhythm and bass, well, rhythm's a whole grid, and bass, you know, you got rhythm and pitch to work with. So this is just to get you started, and particularly if you're just making some simple beats, or even if they're not simple, you know, sometimes that's all you need. I would say maybe check out the song Working Out by JID, or I think another one, A Lot by 21 Savage. Two hip hop songs where the bass is just an 808 that just plays one big long note and it'll go for like a bar or two, and then it does the same thing for the next chord. And so you don't need much always. And then in contrast to that, maybe check out the song What's the Use by Mac Miller, Thundercat playing that bass line, which is smoking hot. That's a really grooving bass line. So it all just depends on what you're going for, what the other instruments are doing, how busy you need to be. But that's to get you started. And of course on the Patreon, we are going to dig in a lot deeper and check out some other options. So please join me there, and I'll see you next time.